You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our continuing Save the Clone Wars series of shows here on the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and tonight we'll be looking back on the Dark Disciple himself, Quinlan Vos, and the Jedi Council, especially those that kind of made him the man that we know him to be at the end of that novel. And to do so, I'm joined by my night sister, Mr. Jonesy himself. Jonesy, how is level 1313 going today?
It is a dark, seedy place, but you know what? I can't think of anyone I'd rather be there with having a drink than you, buddy.
Yeah. I say, is it 1313 or is it 1313?
1313 is how they call it in the audiobook and everything, which is great because saying 1313 gets annoying.
Yeah. Well, kind of like AT-AT and AT-AT.
Oh, we can't get started on that.
Yeah. Do you want? Let's not start the show on a bad note by getting into that conversation. All right. Well, we've got a lot to cover here, and we've got some news that we're going to jump into. And some of this is it was kind of an overall pretty light week, all things considered. I don't know if it's because we covered most of the bigger stuff last episode, but the first thing is we haven't really talked about this, and it's a big deal, but then really isn't a big deal. But they've started primarily filming on episode 9. So we've got Mark Hamill has kind of tweeted a couple things. There's been I think there was a BB-8. Who was it? The guy that runs him,
Brian Herring.
Yeah, he had posted something on Twitter recently saying all that. But anything else beyond that? And we only had that one shot, which was cool, like I said. But okay, cool. Now what do we do? What are we waiting for?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Show us the good stuff. That picture looked like it was maybe in the Falcon, I guess. Is that what it looked like to you?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe they're just picking up. Well, what if they did that? What if there's no time jump and they pick up right as soon as as Last Jedi ends? From that. Yeah,
there's a variety of ways. I mean, Rey and Finn in the cockpit of the Falcon's really not that crazy, or Rey and Poe, or any combination of people, So, but it was fun though. I mean, I like the way JJ frames a lot of those shots. Rian Johnson did a great job during the social media campaign, so I'm looking forward to that. There's a lot of fun discussions to come over the next several months in the year as we get ready for 9 to drop.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that I want or expect episode 9 to pick up right after 8, so nobody get too riled up by that. I was just making a dumb joke. So pretty excited. I guess we'll see what comes from that and what we get over the next couple of weeks, months, whatever that is, that time frame is. So yeah, all good news there. The other thing, we were kind of talking about this on Discord pretty actively when it was going down, but we had the Disney earnings call.
Yeah,
and I know you dialed into it personally, right? So you were listening in. How did that go?
You've heard of live tweeting. I kind of live Discorded it in our own little, in our kind of our private channel for just the few of us, like you and me and Mike and a couple guys. So, but yeah, I went ahead and dialed into it. We didn't really expect to get a lot of Star Wars, like specific name drops, but I was kind of listening for a couple little things.
Yeah. And I think you kind of called it. It was mostly going to be about the park and, the boring stuff like money and all that, but
yeah, we don't need that stuff.
We don't need to talk about that stuff. But the streaming service did come up, right? And I think we got some stuff that we knew about confirmed for 2019. No big surprise there. The Clone Wars and Favreau's live action, though, that was interesting because it does sound like they are kind of the headliners for the program. It seems like they're kind of putting all their chips in on those two particular shows. Yeah, is that fair based on what you heard?
Yeah, that's very much it. So Bob Iger was very clear. They know that in order to make the Disney direct-to-consumer streaming app and service, they keep calling it direct-to-consumer, so you might hear DTC a lot, but they know that in order for people to go and want to subscribe, they've got to have premium content on there. And so they talked a lot during the call about some of the resources they're going to draw from. So they're going to draw from some of the more popular FX shows and from National Geographic. And there was another one in there too. Fox Searchlight. So as part of the merger, they'll have access to Searchlight too. And so, I mean, there's going to be a distinct flavor between what you get on Hulu, which Disney will now have a controlling interest on, and what you'll see in the Disney streaming service. But shows like what Favreau's developing and Clone Wars are going to be the anchor for all of that, because we also see the anchor for that will also come from the 2019 slate of movies. What they talked about in the call was that for the movies that are released in 2019, calendar year 2019, there are no limitations or restrictions, meaning there's no prearranged licensing agreements or other agreements like we've seen with Turner or with TV networks or Netflix and things like that. Right. So for anything released in the calendar year 2019, Disney owned, they are clear to add that to the streaming service. So what that means is, while The Last Jedi will not be in that group, the Solo will be, and Solo will not be either, I guess, because that released in 2018. Yeah. But what we'll see is the movies released next year which will be like Infinity War, and they rolled a whole list of shows out, and Episode 9 will be one of those as well. So by the time Episode 9 releases, the Disney streaming service should be up and running. And then in 2020, after some number of months have gone by, clearly Episode 9 would likely be the very first saga movie released into that service. Yeah. So it's going to be a while before you get the full catalog of Star Wars in there, but they're anticipating that Resistance will be in there. I'm guessing they didn't comment Resistance specifically, but Clone Wars and Favreau specifically will be in there.
That's pretty exciting too, because that really gives them an opportunity to make these home or DTC stuff, or whenever they come to the channel, the live streaming service, really special if they want to, right? Netflix does it. It just shows up and you're like, oh, cool. Rogue One is now on Netflix, and there's really no big hoorah. But knowing Disney, they market and advertise every single thing. And there's maybe opportunities for, behind the scenes stuff, special stuff that we didn't get with the home releases and all that. So, I mean, it's kind of a win-win for us as consumers, provided that you're willing to shell out the money so that you get the service. As far as I'm concerned, this is already, I signed up before not even knowing what the heck was going to be on the channel. So From here on out, everything is just gravy for me. So I was going to do it anyways. So,
well, the interesting thing with that strategy is that they are comfortable with this being I'm going to use the word slow rollout, but basically they don't have to throw everything in it all at once.
Yeah.
And while that might sound frustrating, especially, we don't know how much they're going to charge for this service yet. And I know there's frustration with this. We just have so many ad hoc models now starting to surface, and that's difficult because people just they're starting to kind of want to go back to, I want to be able to, I like Netflix because I get a variety of shows all within one subscription. But since we don't know how much they're going to charge for it, it might frustrate people if they don't have everything just loaded day one. Yeah. But Disney has such a vast catalog, and with some of these newer shows and the movies that they'll be able to release, they'll be able to build that catalog quickly, and it's still going to be quality over quantity. And that's really what they're banking on, is that the quality of their almost verbatim, the quality of that content is what you get with Disney. And, for the most part, he's right. They don't put out a lot of stinkers. I mean, they do have a few movies that don't do well or weren't all that, like A Wrinkle in Time I didn't particularly enjoy. Mm-hmm. But, generally speaking, they put out a really good slate of content, and they recognize that the quality that they have to do for the original shows that they are now developing for that service have to be of top quality. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute of what that means with, how much time and how much money you invest in these shows and the type of talent and people you bring in to do it.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. Like, there's very little that Disney puts out that's not just, good. They've got a pretty high bar. And if you really think about how much they release, and I'm not even just talking about their TV shows, their movies, I'm talking about their theme parks, their cruises. Right. I mean, these guys, they have a bar, they've set it, they hold themselves accountable for that, and they have to, right? But they do a really good job, and I would be fine with a slow roll and quality over quantity, just because I have other ways of getting media and stuff already, right? So I'm not like dying. This isn't going to be the only thing I have. So
Right.
I'll be able to get by, but I do want to make sure that if I'm going to pay more money on top of what I'm paying now for things like Hulu and Netflix and all those, that I'm going to get some quality out of this. And so far, from what I've seen, looks to be that way. And let's segue right into that, because we'll kind of skip over one real quick. We'll come back to episode 10, rumors. But one of the things that just recently was talking about was we're seeing a lot of different numbers right now being touted for how much the budget per episode is going to be with Favreau's. I think I've heard 10 million. Was it yesterday or today? Now they're saying it may actually even be more than 10 million per episode.
Yeah, it was a random tweet, and I don't know the person that tweeted it. I don't know where they come from. It seems like they're in the industry in general, but it was kind of an offhand comment, and it got a little bit of steam. But yeah, basically 10 episodes at 100 million, so roughly 10 million an episode for the development of Favreau's series, which I don't know how you feel about that, but to me, I think that's a pretty sizable investment to make on a TV show. And I think that shows their seriousness and commitment to it, because we started recapping in Discord what some of the most expensive shows there are. And when you look at the quality of some of these shows, so if we look at a show like Daredevil, who has a lot of action sequence and generally pretty good storytelling, at least season 1 I thought was really good. A show like that was, I think, in the 45 million mark. And then you have the Wild Extreme, where I think it's estimated that Game of Thrones was upwards of 15 million an episode, something like that.
You're saying Daredevil was 45 million an episode?
No, for the series. So it's about about 4.5 million per episode.
I'm like, wow, they got really screwed over, because I don't see the 45 million.
No, yeah. So they're all somewhat relatable, because they all do about 10 episodes for a season, right? So
okay, that makes sense.
My bad.
Nope, I got it. Yeah, I would agree. And so this is one of those things I don't get hung up on too much. I don't really even know, like 10 million is a lot of money to me, because, I've got a $3,500 house payment. So yeah, that'd go a long way. That said, I don't really know what this means. Like, in terms of like 10 million, is it a lot? Is it not? I can say I heard that, some of the Game of Thrones were about 10 million each. And I've seen those at least in previews and stuff like that, because I didn't watch Game of Thrones, but yeah, some of the special effects were like really good. And that's always my problem with like TV a lot of times, is they really go for these big hoorah type shows or episodes, and then they tend to fall flat for me, because I lose interest, because you can tell they cut corners when it came to the special effects. I'm looking at you, Sci-Fi Network, right? So I don't know what that equates to. I just know that is a lot of money by all accounts. So with $10 million doing a Star Wars live action, I'm going to go in already pretty confident that we're not going to get anything too cheesy, like, the costumes and the backgrounds. It sounds like they've really committed again to putting out some quality stuff here. So that's all pretty exciting.
Yeah, and you're right. That is usually the concern, is the quality of the effects. When you have action sequences, you into more of the set building and the environment building and the training. But yeah, when you have that, plus you've got to be able to get the blasters looking right, and whatever else you do, you've still got to capture that same spirit all the way through.
Yeah.
And sound design and things like that are always the utmost important in Star Wars, especially.
Yeah, and
with scoring and everything else.
No, you're 100%. And with the animation and stuff, you can forgive a little bit, right? But the minute it goes live action, the bar that you've hit, you're being held up against the movies and the quality of the movies and the sound of the movies and the special effects of the movies and the soundtracks of the movies. That is the bar. You've got to hit that, in my opinion, when it comes to it. I don't think that you can really afford to be anything less, or you've got to be really close to that mark. Otherwise, I think you lose people.
And we see it. I mean, Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon are really putting out top-notch content. I mean, really top-notch content, to where it's not cheesy, at least not if it's intended to be cheesy, it is. But, they are really riveting TV that really engages you, and it's great storytelling. And you don't have to, you're not worried about, I mean, Defenders was a little bit of a miss, but you don't really have to worry about it. You just expect to be entertained, and then they deliver.
Yeah.
And that's the standard that Disney's got to hit with this thing, and that Jon Favreau is going to have this challenge. But it sounds like he's going to have the funding and the support to do it.
The other rumor, I guess we don't need to spend too much time on this one, but there's a couple of posts out there. I've seen them talking about episode 9 being split into 2 parts. You think there's any smoke here with this one, or is this just rumor and somebody's looking for clicks on an ad somewhere?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of rumor. I think the Infinity War split has got people excited because they really needed two parts to set that story up. And then you have your kind of climax where we're at now, and then you're going to have your resolution at the end of the day in another, 2.5 hours. With Star Wars, you've already had two movies to build that up, and you didn't have to put all these other pieces together. That's what the other two movies were doing. They're moving all the pieces all the time, whereas with an Infinity War, you've got, tons of different characters and movies and their own environments, and you got to get them, you have to figure out how they fit.
Yeah, you got to line them all up.
Right. And we saw some comparisons too with like Harry Potter, and they split that book into two parts as well. And again, you look at the source material, and the Harry Potter books are, they're thick.
Yep.
They're big books. And it's really no different really with Game of Thrones. You have these huge novels to where if you were to make that into movies, the TV show works so well because you can take chunks of that at a time. Whereas you're writing Star Wars as a screenplay effectively. You're writing it for this movie and for this episode. And I don't see the value in splitting it apart. And quite honestly, and I think this is some of the concern that we had heard, and maybe you can phrase this up a little bit if I missed this, but I think some of the concern was if you split it into two, then you're starting to maybe overcomplicate the story a little bit from where we are. And we've really missed the mark for the first two episodes for 7 and 8, moving into 9, where we have to do even more exposition to get to that moment of climactic, resolution where we've got to have something that we have to have a new climax now so that we can ultimately resolve our problem. And I don't know that we need all that, at this point.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think the way I would phrase that is I think there's a level of sensationalism that's kind of floating around, still carryover from folks that are upset about The Last Jedi and how that played out, that for them, this movie splitting into two would only make sense because it's, quote, such a mess now that the only way they could ever fix all of this is to create this into two movies. They're just going to need that much time to wrap it all up and do all that. And I just don't buy into that. I think you're right. I think it's they're overcomplicating it. They're not dealing with a whole lot of source material outside of just movies itself, right? In the stories that were set up in 7 and 8. So I don't know. I don't think there's enough here for them to do it. And, maybe it goes to 2.5 hours, maybe it's a 3-hour movie, and that's probably enough time to do it. But I just don't see where there's a huge.
See, and that's the other thing. I don't know that I need a 3-hour movie. We all want more Star Wars. So let's just throw that out there. We all want more Star Wars. But do you need more than 2 hours and 15 or 20 minutes or 2 hours and 30 minutes? To me, that seems like a good movie length.
Yeah, I think if it wasn't 9 and it wasn't wrapping up all 9 movies and the saga and all that, then I would say, I think there's probably a better chance of them going a little bit longer, just because maybe they'll give us something special at the very end where we get like 15 minutes of, the movie ends at 2 hours and 15 or 2 hours and 30, and then we get 15 minutes of just pure, fanboy epilogue type stuff, right? Definitely could maybe see them doing that since this is, the last one of the saga, so.
Give us a chance to introduce Mara Jade.
I love that one too much. And we only got one other thing really to talk about it. There was a Twitter message, a direct message that we got. Did you want to talk about that one real quick?
Yeah, sure. Mandy reached out to us with a really amazing tweet where she kind of walked us through her fandom. She came into a lot of this stuff late. And actually, I related a little bit too, because especially with podcasts, I didn't get into this until really just about a year or so ago. But I won't read the whole response that she sent us. But basically, she used podcasts to get her through, some health issues that she was having, all the kids, and it was just there. And she didn't realize this whole fandom existed, and so it gave her this outlet. And she had so many nice things to say about the show over the last, I guess, about year or so. With Mike and Joe, as well as with you and I as well, that have kind of made up for her childhood, if you would. But we want to just give her a quick shout out and just say thank you for the exceptionally kind words. And when we hear things like that, it really is heartwarming to us that we've had such a positive impact on somebody and that they get as much enjoyment out of this as we do. So it's really humbling. We definitely want to just say hi and thank you.
Hi, Mandy. Thank you. Yeah, it's pretty humbling. Like, I read that and was like, wow, that's very impactful for me. So definitely keeps us motivated. So thank you, Mandy, for doing that. And thank you for everyone else, too. We also obviously get a lot of direct messages and email and everything else and the reviews, and it's all been great. So thank you guys, everyone, for your continued support.
Thank you, one and all.
One and all. All right, let's do this. We are going to cover Quinlan Vos, and then we'll jump into the Jedi Council. And we kind of talked about this coming on before the air about whether or not we break those up or do we just kind of interweave them. And I think what we've decided to do is just kind of interweave them as we go. So hopefully we can kind of piece all this together and make it one cohesive story as we do. But there may be times when we'll have to come back and reference certain things. So we did 2 shows on Ventress, and I think we did a pretty decent job, at least just kind of speaking to who she was, from early on, even before Clone Wars and the animated series, and then obviously all the way through that. And then we ended up with Dark Disciple and ultimately her death there at the very end. And in between all of that, we were kind of talking about Quinlan Vos. We were trying to stay clear of really getting into his character too much so that we could have content to do for this show. But it was purposeful in that there's a whole nother side to Quinlan Vos that was kind of going on in the Dark Disciple novel itself. So before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about Quinlan Vos as a character. We really and we're going to really just stick to canon again, because there is a whole lot of stuff that's out there in the Legends comics, Legends from the Dark Horse comics. But in terms of canon, we don't have a whole lot here to kind of start with. We know there is one scene in episode 1 where he's sitting there on Mos Espa, and this is where, Anakin and Qui-Gon are kind of meeting there in the bazaar area. And you can kind of see him there. He's sitting there with the other Kafars that are kind of around him. They've all got the yellow streaks on it. And there's a whole bit in here or I guess a question about what was he doing on Tatooine. And really, by all accounts, at least from a canon perspective, we really don't know. I think it has been canonized that he was there. That was him. And he was struggling with the fact that he saw Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon Jinn may or may have not seen him. But for whatever reason, he couldn't really talk to Qui-Gon Jinn. And this is part of his character because he is kind of like this undercover dark ops Jedi that they use for a lot of these covert missions, stuff that would probably fall into maybe the grayer areas of what's, upholding the Jedi code or what's holding up the moral standards that the Jedi code try to live up to. And so beyond that, the next thing we have is the episode with Hero, where they're going, the Hunt for Zero, who's not one of my favorite characters, but
you do an amazing impression.
Yeah, and I don't like that guy.
There we go.
I don't want to do it. I'll do it for Imperial Walker some other day, not today. But so Zero the Hutt, there's an episode called the Hunt for Zero, and we get there's one scene there that in particular, because I do want to talk about his character a little bit, just kind of set the stage for what we maybe expect early on, and then what and how that kind of changes over the course of the novel. But there is that in that particular episode, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's standing there with Commander Cody, and they're waiting for Quinlan Vos to arrive. And I think Cody says something like, "Hey, you look pretty, disturbed or not at peace," or I forget whatever the wording was. And he says, "You seem troubled." And Kenobi responds, "Yes, Quinlan Vos has that effect." And Cody says, "Yeah, that Jedi has quite a reputation." Kenobi says, "Yeah, let's just say he's crazy." And so immediately you're getting, okay, you've got a Jedi. He's very different, right, from the get-go than a lot of these Jedi. He comes flipping out of the carrier. He lands, and at one point, the way he even talks to Kenobi, it's almost like the dude. He says, "Well, that's just your opinion, man." Right? So he's got like this surfer kind of laid-back attitude about things. But I know you said I know you've seen the episode, but going into it, do you remember that coming off as his character type, that kind of laid back surfer mentality, I guess, if you want to call it that? No offense to our surfer listeners, but it just seems like he was not already, just even from the very beginning, did not seem like he aligned with a lot of the Jedi that we know, like Qui-Gon or Plo Koon, Ki-Adi-Mundi, all these guys. It definitely stood out from the other Jedi.
Yeah, and I remember a lot from the old Clone Wars comics as well, where it was actually somewhat similar, where, yeah, you have this demeanor that can switch. And we got this throughout the novel too, right? But you have this carefree attitude, this wry grin, and this almost boyish charm to him that almost says immaturity. But then he's able to turn on a dime and get very serious very, very quickly and focus on the task. But yeah, he does have this almost reckless type of demeanor to him sometimes that I think Obi-Wan simultaneously enjoys, but also it probably irks him to no end because Obi-Wan's pretty structured.
Yeah, for lack of a better term. Structured is probably good for him. So you said reckless. Any other words that come to mind when you think about Quinlan Vos?
Well, I think the one that people probably gravitate to the most frequently is probably rogue, right? So, and it's not so much that he does things out on his own, but he's like you said, he's given these shadow ops type of missions to where he's put in these positions to be a lone wolf. And so that's kind of another one I'd probably throw out there is this lone wolf, but rogue. He has to do things his own way because he is in these environments that you have to gain a lot of trust, and you have to, because he's doing the underworld, the dirty deeds that have to be done in order to root out these criminal organizations. That's kind of his strong suit, right? Is infiltrating criminal organizations and bringing down the bad guys, basically.
Yeah.
And so, so he has to be more dynamic than the rest of the Jedi do, I believe. And so that's another one I would do is he actually reminds me a lot of Anakin, like a more mature Anakin, if you will. If Anakin's story was able to develop a little bit further, you could see where him and Quinlan have quite a few parallels.
Yeah, and I'm laughing because there's a part in Dark Disciple where I think I think it's Anakin that's like volunteering to go with Quinlan Vos on this mission initially, and Kenobi makes that comment of like, "Oh heck no, this is like the worst thing that could happen is pair these guys up together." Because just the recklessness there. I had Cunning down as another one. Maverick, kind of like your rogue or you spoke about earlier. I mean, he's got a level of sarcasm. He's witty. He's funny. Idiot was another word that came to mind because of his persona and Ventress.
That was an act.
Yeah, that was all an act. But it's funny because in the novel, the word idiot, whenever she refers to him, it's a proper noun. It's a capital I. So that is his name, according to Ventress anyways, which was kind of cool.
I love it.
There's and then there's a part in the book too, and I forget where this was, but there's at one point where it's after he kind of pairs up with Ventress and he's kind of looking back at his persona, and this is about the time that he's really thinking about, okay, do I need to just come clean with a lot of this stuff? But he's reflecting back on the missions and the persona that he's created for her and for these missions, and he, it's the persona being dashing, witty, strong, and flirty, and he said, he realizes that, hey, at least in his mind, he is dashing, witty, strong, and maybe not the flirty part. That's the kind of part that he's thinking, okay, I can't really say that I'm that because that would go against the Jedi code. And spoiler alert, and we'll talk about this obviously a little bit later, he really is being flirtatious. Even though it started off, as a mission, it ended up getting and becoming much more than that. So.
Well, and we see him in the temple, right? He's a very friendly and well-liked person.
Well-known. Everybody knows him because he's been there since he was a baby. Yeah,
I mean, he grew up in the temple, right? So, but he's just well-liked. He's just a likable guy. And I think that's just his nature, his demeanor. He's just kind, and he's giving, and he's self-sacrificing. And I mean, he's done nothing but self-sacrifice for the most part for his Jedi career, in the name of the Republic, in the name of the Order.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, he's very well liked, very well respected, even though he's a bit unorthodox and has these kind of more unorthodox type of missions he's got to go and take care of.
Yeah. And then on top of all of that, he has a very unique ability in psychometry where he's able to pick up, and I think we may have talked about this in the last episode.
This is one of the coolest abilities too, I think.
Yeah, where he can pick up any object really and get some kind of history from it, whether it's through the way of like visions. So, there were the biggest part, at least for the Dark Disciple novel, was later on when he realizes that it was Ventress who killed his master and not Dooku. He's able to kind of see all of that, and he also can get like feelings and get emotions from that as well.
That's the most interesting one, is that he can actually internalize and feel through the Force what those emotions were. So if it's pain, which we see firsthand later on, he physically feels it to the point where it can make him sick and injure him almost and incapacitate him to that extreme with whatever emotions were imbued into these objects, which is just an amazing gift. But you can see how, and it's very dangerous in the wrong hands of that kind of knowledge. And we'll see that a little bit later with Dooku.
And so let's pick up, I guess, really. So in the Clone Wars episode of The Hunt for Zero, that mission kind of fails. They don't really bring him to justice. Cad Bane gets in the way of it again and all of that, right? But then we don't really get to, there's really nothing else with him until we get to the Dark Disciple novel. And the book starts off really, they're calling him, he's on a mission. We won't get into this part because it's just more set up for kind of what we've already spoken to, where he's undercover, he's playing a role along with one of his best friend or buddy, Desh, who's also a Jedi. And once that mission's over, they call him to the Jedi Council. And before he even goes in, Kenobi's kind of talking to him. And, immediately Vos is, he's kind of joking. They're having a good time. And he can already sense that there's something going on here. And so it's kind of like you said, he immediately just turns it off, right? And gets settled and grounded and realizes that, okay, what's going on? Kenobi says, hey, you're going to come to the council, and kind of clues him in that this may not go very well. And it's going to be kind of hard to hear. And so they head in. And immediately the council is they've come up to this decision about that, Count Dooku has just wiped out pretty much another race. It's been genocide for the most part. And they've pretty much had enough. The war has been raging at this point for almost 3 years. I'm sure all of the Jedi members, the council, and all the Jedi everywhere are just kind of tired, war-torn from all of this going on. And so they've come up with this idea.
Considerable losses.
Yeah.
Not just across the galaxy, but in their own ranks. Yeah,
absolutely. And they've come up with a plan that they want to assassinate Count Dooku, and they make reference to this in the way of I guess all of the strands of war are like these rivers, and the only way to kind of stop all of this is to dam it up. And by damming it up, we mean assassinating Dooku, because they feel like all of these rivers of war are stemming from Count Dooku. He is the body of water that is causing all of this. So that's the plan. And not only is Vos completely, he's just like flabbergasted. He can't even believe what he's hearing.
Yeah, he just looks at Kenobi.
Right, because he's like, yeah, because the other Jedi seem to all be kind of in line with doing, especially, it's kind of being spearheaded by Mace Windu. Anakin jumps in at one point and is like, yeah, man, it's time to, break some eggs, so to speak, right? He's like all about this and thinks that it's time to, maybe we got to think about, doing things differently. And you can it's kind of cool, that part. I don't want to talk about Anakin, but it is cool in that moment that he says all that, because you get the sense of like, okay, I see where this is going and where this, plays out a little bit later down the road, or with his personality and that kind of thing. But,
right.
But yeah, what did you think about this decision? And I don't want to get into, we can talk about the Jedi Order and code here in just a second, but just at the surface, when you're reading this for the first time, do you just feel like, okay, they better have a really good explanation over the course of the next 3 pages, because really it's towards the end of that chapter, and they don't really come back and visit this much at all in the novel. But was this kind of like shocking for you as well?
Oh, it
floored
me. Yeah, it just absolutely floored me that this is the direction that they went. You can sense the frustration, though, and I thought that Christy Dolan did a really great job of getting that sense of it out there. But still, it was very, very difficult to, it's one of these things you have to reread it. You're like, did I hear, and am I getting the right impression that I'm supposed to get from this? And they are so frustrated, and their path is now so clouded. And we are seeing uncertainty left and right, that they don't know what, they're starting to lose sight of what's right and wrong. And even with your more senior, like your Mace Windu, you kind of expect this type of behavior, especially knowing what we saw with Revenge of the Sith. But some of the other ones who tend to be more thoughtful and passive, like Ki-Adi-Mundi and even Plo Koon, and especially Yoda, they acquiesce a lot of this stuff. They're like, well, yeah, this is very serious. But at the end of the day, they're like, well, yeah, this kind of seems like it's probably the best options. We need to keep all options on the table. And what's interesting about this is like Obi-Wan Kenobi, and this is where for I've given Obi-Wan, maybe not on the podcast, but over the last number of years, last decade, I've kind of given Obi-Wan a hard time because what we made him up to be wasn't quite what we got in some of the movies, and we got a better take of him in the Clone Wars, I think, where we got to sense his value and his powers and things like that. But to his credit, I thought this was a very redeeming story for Obi-Wan Kenobi because he was the voice of reason. Like, have we really lost our way so far that we're actually going to consider this?
Yeah. Yeah, he's the moral compass in this book, really.
He really is. That's such a great way to put it. He is the moral compass for this entire storyline, to where he is basically the only one saying, "Guy, everybody, this is just not right. It is wrong." And he kind of looks in disbelief at times at even like Yoda, and then him and Mace are continuously in conflict, and that finally escalates kind of at the end a little bit. But it just took me way aback that this is where we got to, and that this was really going to be a darker story than what we're accustomed to hearing and experiencing. And we're going to see the Jedi in a very different light than what we visualize and what we idolize about them.
And prior to, and so this is where we'll come back to Vos in just a second, but I want to just sidestep a little bit over to talk about the Jedi, at least at this time, and maybe kind of reflect on the Jedi Code a little bit, because that really is, their doctrine, their dogma, what they try to live by and uphold each other too. But one of the things that for the Jedi themselves, and before we came on the air, I kind of threw this question to you, but we've got to remember that at this point they are in a decline of sorts, right? They're not where they really haven't had any Sith in quite some time, and they may be just vulnerable here at this point. And some of this could be Palpatine's grand master plan, right? You gotta acknowledge that the Jedi are in a position that they did not want to be in. First off, with the Clone Wars, they are peacekeepers, and Qui-Gon, or both Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, a number of other Jedi say this in movies and the comics and everything else prior to all of this happening. But they are peacekeepers, and they don't want to be. They shouldn't be in a position to fight these wars, and yet here they are, thrust in the midst of a battle. It's now 3 years since that started. They are commanding these troops, and really, we can talk. I mean, we can probably do a whole show really just on war itself and what that does to a person. But if you look at war itself and look at what that Jedi Code is saying: no emotion, peace; ignorance, there's knowledge; passion, there's serenity; no chaos, there's harmony; no death, there's the Force. War in itself completely goes against most of those, if not all of them. Right. And so you've got these guys that are now leading this war, and it, in some sense, it is broken them, right? It's really diminished a lot of their resolve, and so it can be really easy, like you said, again, to be hypercritical of the Jedi at this point, especially the Council and like Mace and Yoda and that sort of thing. But you got to remember too, I guess, to give them a somewhat of a pass, is they really are in a weird position. Not only just because they're the hubris and all of that, but then they're being asked to do something that's not really, things aren't very clear in war. The good guys are not always easy to pick from the bad guys, and sometimes you have to make these decisions that may seem immoral or go against your moral code and that thing at times. And it's very easy that once you start down that, you can make really even worse decisions, like, hey, let's go assassinate somebody. Hey, let's go ahead and execute somebody, right? These are the two kind of bad decisions that were all agreed upon by the Jedi Council in the Dark Disciple novel. And so there's got to be a lot of it there's got to be a lot of reasons for that. They don't just come to this conclusion, right, based on what we see in the novel. There's a lot of things that played into that led them up into really kind of rationalizing a lot of this, and rationalizing this against their morals and their beliefs in that Jedi Code. Do you agree with any of that, or you think I'm going like too far there in defending them?
No, I think you're right on money. You also had this immensely powerful being with Sidious / Palpatine that is really orchestrating their demise. I mean, he is actively working against them. He is actively using these situations that he's kind of putting them in order to they're doing it to themselves at this point. And this is the grand master plan of the Sith, right? This is why they lurk in the shadows and why they influence things from behind until they're ready to strike. And this is the quote unquote new way that the Sith do this, right? Compared to the millennia of what they did before, where it just didn't work and there was just so much combat between them. But this is how they do it. They're the masters of deception. They're the masters of manipulation. And the best way to defeat your enemy is to have them turn in on themselves and completely lose themselves. And we see this with the Jedi. And so it's not a pass. They have a decision to make. And you had posed this question too: the darkness, the dark side is a shroud on everything, right? And so with Yoda in particular, are they trying to see the future? Are they trying to see these paths? And now they're so masked that you're unable to discern what the truth is. And you're right. And they're effectively lost because they've lost themselves, and they're doing all of these things, and they're spiraling out of control. Might be a little bit dramatic, but you don't really have to go too far to get to that point, right? To where you actually feel like they are in this spiral and they cannot get themselves out of it because this war won't let them out of it. And they're not strong enough to break away and to make a different decision that'll set them on a different path, because they're so dependent on the path being laid out there for them so they can pick it, rather than being bold and brave enough in order to actually, forge a new path on their own. Instead, they're just kind of going further and further down, I think.
Yeah, and speaking of Yoda, because I think you kind of touched on him just slightly there, but there's, as he's very, throughout the book, really, there are a couple instances where, yes, he speaks up, but he almost allows them being the rest of the council to kind of weigh in and go back and forth and banter. And as a leader, sometimes you do that, right? Sometimes you allow
absolutely
those folks to kind of, I don't say the people that you work with or the people that work for you, report up to you, whatever. Sometimes when you get into these contentious type discussions, you allow that to happen. So long as it stays civil and it's constructive, it allows people to get those feelings out and really kind of start brainstorming and getting thoughts out. That's all good team development type stuff, right? 101. But there are times with Yoda, and it can be frustrating because I think it's not only in this novel, but in other things as well, where it seems like he's almost too passive and he's allowing too much to go on, where he really should just come in and say, okay, enough's enough. I'm going to make a decision here and go one way or the other, take a stance one way or the other. And really, he's kind of the vocal minority, at least in this novel, a few times, particularly with this move to assassinate Dooku. He's just he's saying, he's hearing all sides, and he does agree with Kenobi, and he does agree. He kind of shuts up Anakin, but he kind of agrees with Mace Windu as well, and all the other ones. So he doesn't really take a stance. It's a little bit more passive. But one of the things I want to think, at least, right, to save face for Yoda, is he's so tied up in the future, and we know that that's one of his obsessions. It's probably something he's very good at, or we know he is. He's always looking at it. He's very cautious about it, and he warns that, you can't stay too focused on the future because a lot of that can change, and it's always in motion and all that. But you have to think that maybe at some point he did see that in order for Quinlan Vos to, be successful, or for Dooku to fall, this had to happen. Maybe not the assassination itself. I don't know that he saw that, but I would like to think that he at least saw that this was the mission, whether it fails or succeeds, was, beyond the scope of what he was able to determine. But not only that, but then, the other shocking part of all of this to kind of bring it back to Quinlan Vos was that he was going to be paired up with Asajj Ventress, who was a former Sith, and just no one in the council really cared about at all. I mean, she was viled in their eyes for the most part, right? So not only was he okay with an assassination attempt, but then two, to pair him up with Asajj Ventress, and he goes so far as to say that if you do not go with Asajj Ventress, you will fail. He makes it very clear you're going to fail unless you pair up with her. So I guess to kind of what I'm trying to say is maybe he didn't know, maybe he didn't like the fact that it was an assassination attempt, or maybe he knew that it was and wasn't okay with it, but knew maybe it wasn't going to be successful. But these things had to happen in order for the ultimate end being that balance was brought to the Force, and that, somehow he could see that was all going to be, a good ending in some way, and that this was just, one of the things that had to happen. So, any thoughts around Yoda, I guess, at this point? I know you were kind of frustrated too with the fact that he was a little bit more quiet at times as well.
Yeah, you always want Yoda to exhibit that leadership, because he's just, we love everything Yoda, and his leadership is well respected. Even when they challenge him, they really defer to him. And like he said, a good leader lets everyone have their say, and they get their feedback in there, whether you go that direction or not. And so, but in this case, it's really tough. You bring up a good point, because it does seem like Yoda knows and senses something between, even before it all happens, that Ventress and Vos are somehow tied together, and that this is an important combination here that is important for this to happen. And even if he doesn't quite understand why, he knows that this event has to have them two together in order for this to work out in any particular way. And so we'll kind of bring that back together as we wrap up of why that may have been important, and what kind of foreshadowing he may have had there. But maybe this is a good opportunity to kind of switch back over to Vos now and start to see where he's at, especially as he starts getting into the relationship with Ventress.
Yeah, and he's against he's definitely shocked by all of this, right? But given his background in some of the gray ops and the shadowy ops, if there's any one Jedi that's probably, I'm not going to say okay, but maybe does acquiesce to the fact that this is just another mission that he has to do, it's probably going to be him. And so we really don't get a lot of any more pushback from him. In fact, it just kind of, the book picks up where he's back to his old witty self, and he's all about the mission, trying to get in with Ventress. And we've talked a lot about that relationship in the Ventress episode, but to kind of summarize, she doesn't want him there with her. She's kind of on her own lone path, and he is, trying to insert himself, and they go through a number of different things on that very first mission that she's on, where he's interfering with her, and eventually she kind of takes him in as a lost dog and starts training him. And this whole time he's doing the mission the way he's supposed to, and you don't get a sense initially, at least, that he's got any kind of feelings for her, affection for her in any way. But he definitely respects her. He can definitely, he makes one comment in there in the novel that he understands that how, given her prowess with lightsabers and in combat, he could see why Anakin and Kenobi were never able to best her in combat. It was almost kind of a stalemate every single time, or she'd get away or slip through their hands in some way. So from that aspect, I think he was very respectful of her. And through that, is where kind of all those feelings started to creep in that we got with them and that relationship. And I'll go back to chapter 8, because again, that is the pivotal chapter for both of them. This is the one where after the Raimi mission, whatever, I forget her name now.
Lost Raim.
Yeah, Lost Raim. After that mission, it's when they're kind of sitting there and they're having some drinks, and there's a really good piece in there. And I don't know that we spent too much time on this with the Ventress one, where she's reflecting.
What's your story?
Yeah, what's your story, right? And he makes that comment about, I don't really have a story. That I've got a lot of things that I've done, but nothing's ever really been about me. I don't have a story. And it's not till later on, when he's back in his room and they've gone their ways and they're starting to realize that something weird is happening between them, that he does reflect again on that on a personal level, that I don't have a story. He doesn't, he's been doing all these missions, and he does what he's been told. He's a good soldier in that aspect. He's probably done some shady things that go against the Jedi code, but really none of this has really been about him. And to some extent, that's kind of the way it's supposed to be, though, with the Jedi, right? It's supposed to be about the other people. It's about, serving the greater humanity, that kind of thing. But you almost get the sense that she's influenced him in that way. And we've talked about that in the last episode. They're kind of coming together. Their personalities are starting to mend and blend and bleed into one another. And this is that first sign of it. At least for me, this is one of the very first signs of where we see, okay, he's no longer thinking about the greater good and the mission itself. He's really starting to internalize a lot of this stuff and say, how am I defining myself? What am I doing for myself? And from that point, that leads him into saying, okay, what can I do for myself? Well, maybe I can get with Ventress, and maybe this relationship here that, I've been telling myself I shouldn't be involved with, I should be involved with, because that's what I need right now. That's something that I could do for myself, that kind of thing. So
I think one of the interesting things is last week in particular, we really focused on where Asajj was when we picked her up at the beginning of this book, and then in 1313, and then the bounty hunter life. And I think I called her lost. We thought she was lost. Quinlan Vos didn't know he was lost until they had this conversation over drinks.
Yeah.
And he wasn't drunk. I mean, and so he pretends to be, but he's not. He just had this moment of clarity with such a simple, seemingly innocent question. And all of a sudden, you're right. He completely, it unhinged him almost, to the point where he was paralyzed of, I don't really know I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm doing. What am I doing to contribute? Am what I'm doing, does it even matter in the grand scheme of things? And it really just turned him upside down. And you're right. It was, we really focused that so much on Ventress, but he has those same hangups, just a completely different lifestyle that has created that similar scenario that she was presented with, or that she's been dealing with and living for so many years now.
And then, so, again, going back to this story, they eventually, he does confide in her and lets her know that, hey, I'm a Jedi. And she says, yeah, I've always known that. And up until that part, he kind of felt like, hey, I've done a really great job of keeping all this secret. And I think it was a shock to him too, that when, she mentions that, yeah, I already kind of knew that you were, that kind of leveled him a little bit more. And then, as far as him converting and, they have their kiss, and he's giving into a lot of these, the things that he shouldn't be doing, right? As far as attachments and personal feelings and love and all of that. And there's not a whole lot of, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I never really got a whole sense of, like a really good sense that there was a lot of struggle with him there. And maybe, again, this speaks to the fact that he's kind of, he's not he definitely lives up to the, I won't say obedience, but in terms of what the Jedi asked him to do, he does that, right? But in terms of like the other stuff, what he's actually doing, what he's doing, he tends to be a little bit more gray. Maybe that's why it wasn't so hard for him to just, go against it, because he doesn't. I guess what I'm saying is we never really got a whole sense from him in the novel that he was struggling, that there was a big internal struggle with the fact that he was starting to have feelings for her, he fell in love with her at any point. In fact, he just kind of goes with it, and he just takes it all in, and he stays like that all the way to the very end, to the point where he's sitting there trying to, take down Dooku and Sidious because he loves her that much. But did you ever get a sense that he was really struggling with this love that he suddenly had for Ventress at all?
Well, something we have is that the Jedi never question the how of how he accomplishes any of his missions. And so you're right, he is given free form to use whatever means he needs to do, given that he's a Jedi Master, and they expect him to operate within a loosely defined box, right?
Yeah.
And I think throughout this, we sense that he feels like there's something there, but as soon as he makes the deal to embrace the dark side, to entertain the dark side, I guess early on, maybe not embrace it, but to entertain the dark side, and then to give in to these urges or these, feelings or whatever is starting to develop, that then we start to see those cracks where they've been there all along, but they're widening.
Yeah,
exposed. And now we're getting these geysers are starting to open up, right? And so while he wasn't giving into it quite all the time, or he was still kind of playing the part, you could start to see, especially after that conversation, that this was just bound to happen, because you suppress all this stuff for so long, relationships and the closeness of another person, to where you feel like you have, relationships and something more serious than a friendship. You repress that stuff for so long. No amount of discipline, or for most people, not everybody, but for most people, that's a very difficult thing to resist, especially whenever you feel like you fit so completely. And like we said in previous episodes, that their ability to work together and to really fit a good team and a very complementary team is just something you don't come across very often. And it's very easy to start to want to build on that into something more that's, not just professional.
Yeah, and you threw a question out here about whether this mission could have ever been accomplished had he not given himself over to the dark side in the way he did. I don't know the answer to that, honestly. I guess I could go both ways and make an argument for and against whether or not he could had he not embraced it. I don't know that I got a sense from the novel that that going to the dark side gave him anything more than power. Maybe that's all it was, really. Maybe it was just the fact that he was able to channel his emotions for the death of his master, his emotions for her, because that played a huge role into it as well. That by doing that, it made him a more powerful Force user. But beyond that, I don't know that there was. I got a sense that there was anything more that he was gaining by going over to the dark side, and that's a lot. Don't get me wrong. I'm not diminishing the fact that that isn't significant in any way, because it is. But given how many times we know, or given what we know about Dooku and how powerful he is, I don't even know that would have been enough. I never got the sense from the novel, at least, that he was ever powerful enough, whether he was a Jedi, whether he had given himself over the dark side, that he was going to ever be enough to really kind of take Dooku down. Even with Ventress, I don't know that they really were the right team. I think in their minds they were at one point. I think a lot of that may have been just fueled by emotion and love, and we're a team, we're going to get this done, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, Dooku's just another breed of Jedi, or I'm sorry, of Sith, that I don't know that he would have actually been able to take him down.
Well, I viewed it more as that he would never be able to actually strike and deal the killing blow without letting go of the Jedi framework, the Jedi mentality. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that's how I viewed it more as, because we saw that with the sleeper too. He hesitated. There's no need for me to kill this thing. It just wants to survive. It might be the last one of its kind, and she drove home the point. It doesn't matter. If you're going to make the hard decision and if you really want to do this, then you have to commit. And in order to commit, you've got to lose this other part of yourself. And I think to that point, he had to give himself over, because he couldn't. And this is the hard thing. You can't go back to that lifestyle. And this is where the Jedi are probably wrong, where you can't ask someone to go and do something that dark and then expect them to come back. Although ironically, they kind of allow it. Mm-hmm. You can't expect to come back from that all the way. You've been asked to do something that is so against your code that you can't expect anything except for it to change you. And I think the difference with Vos is, Vos has always been on the fringe. He's been in the gray, as you said. So if anyone was going to be able to do it, then they'll roll the dice there. But in general, it's just not something you should expect from someone. I mean, you make that kind of difficult decision, it sticks with you forever.
Yeah, and some of the other just quick questions that we had about whether or not do we feel like he would have ever left the Jedi Order for her? I think so. I think he was that in love with her that he really believed that, he was going to, again, take down the two heads of that and be free of that. And there's that one scene towards the very end when, she's sitting out there on that park bench and he walks up behind her and he puts his arms on her, starts rubbing her neck, and then he flips over and, they're hugging and kissing and loving. I mean, it's just like they're so both of them really at that point are so in love with one another that they're willing to throw it all away and do whatever they need to do to be happy with one another. It's no longer about anyone else but themselves. And It seems like very selfish, right? It seems selfish, and sometimes we equate that, at least in Star Wars world, selfish means the dark side and all that. But to me, they're kind of they were almost in this, well, he had kind of flipped over maybe too far at that point. I think they probably would have naturally settled somewhere in the middle in that gray, and I think they both thrive in that as well. But I don't think there's any question that he would have left the Jedi Order. For you?
That's a hard one. The romantic side of me wants to say, yeah, he would have ditched it all. But I also know how difficult that is to leave. I mean, he's basically leaving his family. He's leaving everything he's known behind. And I think the reality of that, and she saw that when he came back, when they rescued him and he got, quote unquote, better. She said, you're right back to being a Jedi, and you can't leave that lifestyle. You can't leave it behind. And now we know that he was using it to his own ends by that point. But at the same time, it's a little too easy for him to go back to that with any kind of hiccup. And so I think it's always this something that's hanging between them, to where even if he were to leave, how easy would it be for him to try to go back to it in any kind of difficult situation, or if something were to happen. And we find out later, that's kind of his place, and he sees his place finally at the very end of Asajj's story. But yeah, I mean, the romantic side, I'd love to see. You always want to see him, the couple gets together and everything works out. But it's just never that simple, And it would have been interesting to see what the reality would have looked like had they had that opportunity to see what that looked like and go that far.
Yeah, we have very few happy endings in Star Wars.
No,
believe it or not.
They're all temporary.
Yeah. I mean, that's just life in general. But going back to the story, and again, we've kind of jumped around a little bit, but if we pick up from, them falling in love and that kind of thing, there's, she goes to the training, and eventually, when they get to Dooku and he gets captured, through his, Dooku forces him to take his lightsaber, his master Thome's lightsaber, and that's where he realizes that, through his psychometry, that it wasn't Dooku that killed him, it was actually Ventress a long time ago, and that really that kind of floors him, like to no end. The fact that he had already in his mind had this idea that it was Dooku and had all that rage, and he was feeding off of that and coming in, hot and heavy, redlined for this fight based on all that energy, all that emotion. And then it turned out to be the one person that he had just completely opposite feelings for in every other way. The one person he was truly in love with and all that. I mean, that was absolutely crushing and devastating for him. And then he takes on this persona of, was it Admiral Enigma?
Enigma, yeah.
So he takes on that role. And all the while, we're led, at least in the book, to believe that that this was just a front, that he hadn't really churned, and come to find out later that he still had a lot of dark feelings in him. We'll come back to that in just a sec, 'cause I do want to talk about Yoda and how he's able to kind of pull that out of him. But that had to have been pretty emotional for him, and probably completed his turn to the dark side. In my opinion, that was the moment. That was the catalytic moment for him where, yes, he had already toyed to the dark side. He had already gone so far, but I think that was it. That was the brink at which there was no point of return for him. And I say that when there really was, I guess, at the end of the day, which I don't know how I feel about that, but he did come back. But that was really the point where he really converted over to the dark side and was able to suppress the dark side enough that neither Anakin nor Obi-Wan or even anyone else outside of Yoda were able to even detect the fact that he was that far gone. Ventress knew, because she, knew him on a personal level, and had toyed with the dark side herself. But that was a pretty big moment for him to have to kind of go through all that, and the lie, I guess, that someone that close and personal had done something that horrible.
Well, and they had said when Vos was able to suppress it and actually start hiding the darkness from Ventress, that he was lying to himself, when, of course, that turned out to be 100% not true. And you're right. He had, by that point, fully embraced it to where he was actually able, whether he convinced himself of this or not may be debatable, but he was actually able to completely control this manipulative ability that the Sith excel at. And whether that, I don't know if that was taught by Dooku during his imprisonment or what, but his ability to conceal that was really amazing, especially from Ventress, when they developed that such a close relationship, that he would be able to hide that from her was really, really surprising. That he could hide that from the Jedi, I could actually get on board with, even though it was kind of a short timeline to learn that type of mastery. He was a master, I suppose. But that he was able to hide that from Ventress was really surprising. And it goes to show the depth of the manipulation and how much he had bought into it by that point. And quite honestly, if he already developed this master scheme in order to get both Dooku and Sidious at the same time, then maybe we can get on board a lot easier with that too. Where he's like, okay, I've set my singular mind focus now. Now I know what I have to do if I want to protect and save everything. And I've got to commit. And yeah, and this is how this is going to work. And he starts meditating and making it happen.
Yeah, and that whole level of manipulation, honestly, when there's like emotional feelings involved, I mean, there's very direct parallels, and we kind of skipped over this a little bit, but there's direct parallels for me, right? I get him. There's Anakin, and even more recently with Kylo, in the fact that when he's talking to Rey and telling her that her parents are nobodies, and he's really wanting her, he's doing that whole "come join me and rule the galaxy together." He's playing on all those emotions, and you can make the argument that he has feelings for her, and what that means we don't know yet. But yeah, I mean, that's just that common theme with those that have turned to the dark side. It's that selfishness. That's, I want you, I need you, I'm going to manipulate you to make sure that you're with me, and together we'll get rid of everything else so that we don't have to worry about it. That kind of thing. But there's definitely parallels, I think, between all three of those types of relationships here. In Star Wars, and there's probably other examples that are not immediately coming to mind right now. So at this point, he's become Admiral Enigma. There's the whole rescue effort. So Kenobi and Anakin enlist the help of Ventress once again. Then we kind of skipped over the freeing with, or at least the attempt by Ventress and Boba Fett's gang, because he really wasn't, didn't succeed, and in his part, he just pretty much status quo. He was continuing to be who he was at that point. So, but it wasn't until we get, the lack of trust coming from Ventress, and Anakin and Kenobi, or it seemed a little bit better, but when they went to go rescue him and they brought him back, everyone believed that he was fine. And Kenobi was like fighting for this guy, saying, no, he's good. He's going to be fine. And he's, not, this has all been a ruse, and don't worry. He's on our side. And they end up getting him, they kind of rehabilitate him, I guess. And right. we don't get a lot of background. We just know that these things are happening, but we don't get his perspective from things. And there's a reason why, because he's really not rehabilitated. In fact, there's 2 instances where he gives up information on 2 particular missions that he basically tips off Count Dooku, in the Separatists at least. And that's where they started kind of put 2 and 2 together that, okay, we've got a pretty close circle here. And somehow in these last 2 missions, they've failed because we've got a leak somewhere. And so it's at this point that I think it's Kenobi, or the council at least, comes together, and they go ahead and start talking about, hey, we need this is, Mace Windu is completely convinced right out the gate that it's him. We've talked about this. I knew this was going to happen. I warned you guys, kind of thing. And they bring Quinlan Vos up to the council, and he goes and talks to Yoda. And Yoda it's pretty subtle, but he makes mention of the fact that he touches him, and he says, he makes the analogy that much like Quinlan Vos is able to kind of discern history and emotions from artifacts, I can do the same thing from people or beings. And it's through that is where Yoda realizes, he feels it, he senses it, he knows that Quinlan Vos, yes, indeed, has turned to the dark side, and that this is all a big, ploy or scheme for some kind of larger project. And so the council gets together and they decide, they start talking about, okay, so what do we do with him now? He is a former Jedi. He is out loose and running around, screwing up missions and risking the lives of millions of people for the most part. So what do we do with him? And again, this is where we're going to come back to the Jedi and some of the, the lack of good judgment here, the lack of moral decision making. But they seem to really kind of boil this down to it's very black or white. They deal in absolutes, and Kenobi calls them out for dealing in absolutes, but they decide that the best thing at this point is to execute Quinlan Vos. And that's the direction they all agree to. It's first, I think it's Mace Windu that kind of throws it out there initially.
Ki-Adi-Mundi really...
Yeah, he jumps right in.
Really drives it home.
Yeah, he's like, yep, yeah. I'm 100% with you here. And I think Plo Koon jumps in there as well. I mean, it's just those 3-4 characters. We don't get a whole lot from the other guys, but these are, the bigger standing Jedi Council members, the Masters, compared to the other ones. But yeah, it's pretty much unanimous. Again, with the exception of Kenobi, who immediately makes a stand, but by saying, this is nuts. This is not who we are. We shouldn't be even talking about this. There's got to be other ways that we can do this. And you threw out an idea. You said, why don't we just put him in the library? Why did they have to go the route of just killing him?
Just
I mean, do you think there was
library.
What other, I mean, again, this is another part in the book where I'm just like floored because I'm thinking, how do they come to these terrible decisions so quickly, and how do they all agree with them? Could they have done something else?
I don't know. I mean, they want to execute Dooku too, right? So I mean,
kill everybody.
Just everybody that doesn't agree now. Now we've really gone off the rails, and I don't know. I still struggle to figure out what the heck is going through their mind, and I really haven't been able to quantify it. I mean, we as a society, when we have people that do wrong things, there's a strong contingent of society that also believes in death penalty as well, right? And so we don't have to go very far to see the parallels here. But when you have a body of individuals that want to treat this like a Jedi and in the house matter, but that supposedly value life so much that they are willing to, and they're trying to be passive about this, but let's just face it, they hate the dark side. I mean, they hate as much as they want to say the whole speech about hate, the Jedi seem to hate the dark side, and they hate what he's become. And we start to see these judgments that are reflective of that strong of an emotion. And so all the things they preach, they just want to eliminate the problem. And we saw this with Mace and Revenge of the Sith with Palpatine, right? When we finally get the face of what's really going on, his answer is to end this right now, once and for all, right? And we see that same behavior, at least Mace Windu's consistent, I suppose. But it's just unfathomable that the council as a whole was unanimous. I mean, Yoda was somewhat quiet again, and he's more in the middle, but then he doesn't object. He's like, we have to continue to keep options on the table, and we can't really...
he actually says that all things should be considered at this point.
Yeah, and Obi-Wan, again, to his credit, the poor guy, like, no, we have our limits. We are Jedi. We have a code. We have a, this is who we are, and this is not who we are. And so, I mean, they are just beyond lost at this point of the decisions that they're making. And you could just tell they don't know what to do. They've lost Dooku. And now this type of behavior could just continue. And then they had Barriss Offee. They brought Barriss Offee up a couple of times, right? From the Clone Wars as well.
Yeah.
And so they're seeing some trends developing now, and they're worried. They're scared. I don't even know if it's losing power, but they're just scared that they are turning Jedi into the world that are going down these very powerful wrong paths that lead to ultimate destruction and death and pain.
And you got to wonder too, like whether, it's probably unprecedented in their lifetimes. Maybe Yoda's seen this before, but again, you've got to remember that they've gone so long where some of this hasn't happened to this level that, I don't even know what is their process. What is their process when someone goes to the dark side and is among them? Is it suicide or execution? Because it doesn't sound like it is, right? And I would not expect that to be. So, how common was this occurrence, or how common is it that someone like this converts over to the dark side? And what do they do with those folks? It didn't sound like they had a really good plan, at least not in the novel.
Right.
If they let him go, would they have, or if they try to go after him and execute him, would they have a Jason Bourne kind of situation on their hands where they've got this guy who's now, a lethal weapon out in society, running from the law kind of thing? We didn't get to see that because they obviously decide that they're going to send him on another mission to go assassinate someone else, the same person, I guess. And I threw this out there, and we don't need to get into this too much because it really isn't. It was more just me doing research about these kinds of dilemmas and the psychology behind a lot of it. But there's something called the trolley problem, and what it says is, is it okay to make a moral decision in killing maybe one person to save the lives of many others? It's a whole utilitarianist type view of things where the actions of one, or the killing someone for the sake of saving millions of other people, is that the right thing to do? You've heard it with like Hitler. If you go back in time and you killed Hitler, is that the right thing to do, even if he was a baby, because you know that you're ultimately going to save millions of lives for people that happened that died in kind of World War II thing. But the reason I'm only even bringing this up is because in Utini said this earlier in our Discord when I threw that video out there. He said, well, it's not really a practical scenario because there's always lots of other options, and I agree 100%. And that's my frustration with the Jedi Council here is they're dealing in absolutes. They've got all these different variables, a very complex issue, and they file it down to very black or white decisions of, well, either we keep him or we get rid of him. And to me, it just seems like, again, that's it's indicative of how far the Jedi had fallen, how much the shroud of the dark side had really consumed them. That they would be able to boil all of this down, all the complexities and the nuances of the situation to really, we have no other recourse at this point but to assassinate, or we have no other recourse but to execute somebody like Quinlan Vos.
Well, and here's the real problem is that the ones they want to assassinate, the ones they want to execute aren't the problem, right? They aren't even attacking what the real problem is. They just, what they view the problem is. And that's the craziness of this whole thing is if they would have succeeded, it would have been a setback, but it would have done nothing. You know, in the grand scheme of things, it still would have done nothing. It would have just slowed Palpatine's plans just that much.
Yeah.
I mean, Dooku was vital. I mean, he was essential and vital because of his the way that he's able to bring systems in line and things like that, but it would not have solved the problem. And then they would have had this decision on their hands. And you talk about another set of circumstances that the Jedi would have to then figure out how to live with themselves with that. I think you would have had considerable problems as a result of that had this story gone on and not ended in the way it did.
Yeah, and we're kind of coming to the end really, but I mean the rest of the story with Quinlan Vos is really his determination, for lack of a better term or word, to kill Dooku, to kill Sidious, and he goes to whatever and does whatever he needs to accomplish that. I mean, he goes so far as to kill Desh and who was the other Jedi there? That
Cab Bions.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, and they both die. He kills clone troopers.
Desh was like his best friend too, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's doing anything and everything he can at this point. He is completely consumed. You can make the argument that he's completely consumed by the dark side, or he's completely consumed by his own passion and emotions for Ventress and killing Dooku himself, that he is gone. I mean, he is making terrible decisions left and right. He's got, blinders on. What's that?
Can't be reasoned with at all.
Yeah, absolutely. He's manipulating Ventress and doesn't even know he's doing it by telling her just be quiet, don't worry. And I'm paraphrasing. He doesn't say that. He actually comes across as almost being very, hey, look, I'm doing you a favor kind of thing. Just follow me here. Several instances we talked about that where they had an opportunity to kill Dooku, but he was still he had his eye on the bigger picture. Not giving her a lot of information, so that's very controlling in that aspect where he's not going to give her anything. He feels like he knows what's right. He knows what's best for her, and he's taking advantage of the fact that she's in love with him, and she goes with it. She constantly challenges him, but at the end of the day, she just says, "Okay, fine. I'm going to trust the fact that I love you and that you are making good decisions." And she rolls with it too, right? So that's terrible in of itself. And it all kind of ends with him, obviously, Asajj sacrificing her life to save him. And it kind of resets a lot of things for him. Maybe it snaps him out of it, I guess, to some extent, at least initially. And it's, going through rehabilitation after that, and Dooku gets away. And we don't, the Jedi at this point pretty much dropped the whole idea of assassination, at least that we know of anyways. And he goes on this, months, I think they say months pass after all of that occurs before they go ahead and bury her. And it's during that time where they're still sending him on missions, so they trust him still. And they're sending him on these really low-key, low priority, low-risk type missions just to kind of get him acclimated into being, a Jedi again and making sure that he's not going to flip and that things are, he's on the up and up, so to speak. And he goes on several of those missions, And, at the very end of the novel, once him and Kenobi head over and they send her off and, with her Night Sisters and all of that, that's kind of where, for the most part, where a lot of his story ends. We don't have a lot of details. I think they name drop him in, is it Sith? Revenge of the Sith? I think they name drop him
right
in that movie. And we know from the comic books that he does survive Order 66. In the Darth Vader series, there's one particular arc where, and I'm going to forget their names right now. Sorry, I apologize. But there are two Jedi that are on the run from Vader. And one of the older one, the master tells his Padawan, hey, I've only shown you a couple things. If you need your training to complete, you need to run, hide, and go look for Quinlan Vos because he's out there somewhere. So we do get another confirmation, at least in the Darth Vader comic more recently, that he is out there somewhere. But that's it. His story kind of just ends there. We don't have a lot of information beyond that. We don't know exactly where he is. I'd like to think he's probably still around. And I would say that we've got several characters now between somebody like Ahsoka and Quinlan Vos. We're starting to get more and more of these gray kind of characters, which would be cool if at some point they decided to kind of throw them all together and create something, or bring them together and create some new order. I'm speculating and fanboying here, but yeah. That's kind of where it ends. That's at least where his story ends. And we don't really get a whole lot from his perspective. And we really don't get a whole lot from the Jedi's perspective either. Like, there's not a lot of resolution. We have basically Kenobi telling everyone, you were dumb. We should never have done this. Look how far we've fallen. He gives this really cool speech at the very end of the novel that really puts them in their place and makes them think about the bad choices that they've just made and not to do it again.
I don't really feel like Mace really accepted.
He don't care.
Was that?
I said, he don't care.
No, I don't think he ever really felt like, he never really accepted accountability for it.
No, not at all.
He just kind of conceded that, okay, yeah, Ventress later life on the line, and we should respect that, and we'll basically salvage Vos's life as repayment for that debt. And that was really it. That was, and again, like you said, there's no change in Windu there. Yeah.
Any thoughts on where he'd be right now or what he'd be doing?
Well, like I said, I'd stick him in the library, but I mean, that's just me. But I don't know. I like the idea of him surviving, especially in a post Revenge of the Sith world or timeline, I guess. And I kind of see him doing some of the things that he did with Ventress, and getting some sort of enjoyment out of that, and as much as you can when you're somewhat on the run. But I see him doing that lifestyle, and I think in some respects he's honoring Ventress of probably doing the little things that can help make a difference in a really dark time in the galaxy. When
he makes that comment. Sorry, he makes that comment at the very end where he's gonna, from this point forward, I'm gonna do everything that I can and basically redeem, or not let her die in vain, essentially, is what he's saying. He doesn't say those exact words, but he goes into this whole tirade in the book about, hey, from now on, I'm on the straight and narrow path, and it's because of you. Because again, his mind, or at least what we talked about this last one, she was redeemed, and she did save the Jedi Order, at least to some extent. She corrected a lot of where they were going, whether she realized it or not.
Yeah, I mean, and when she died, and he didn't give in to that hate, and he saw the sacrifice for what it was, I mean, you really did feel, the breaking of the spell of the dark side. Mm-hmm. And you're right, he has no intention to ever sacrifice her memory now for really anything. And he'll do anything to keep her memory alive and to, do his part now. And she told him, you are a Jedi. You be a Jedi, and live that life and keep doing things, even if they're small, even if they seem insignificant, and just do the right thing. Keep doing the right thing, and, be you. Don't get wrapped up in everything else that goes around, and the hate and everything else that has gone with his fall and descent into the dark side.
He's a great character, Quinlan Vos. I really like him in a lot of different ways now, more than I did, not having done research and prep for the show and that kind of thing. But if there's any one particular Jedi that you would think could hide from Vader and is still alive, it's got to be this guy. He's he's a hunter, he's a tracker. He lives in the underworld, knows the underworld like the back of his hand. He can disappear, right? From the Empire, he can disappear probably from the Jedi. So you got to think that he, at least, is, if he's not still alive, he did live a life without ever being found by the Empire and Vader and that kind of. So
he's such a different type of Jedi. That's what makes him
absolutely.
so cool.
Yeah.
He's not stuck up. He's not in a robe. He's out in the field. He's out doing real world stuff. And it was just, that's always refreshing. You get a different take on this order, which just seems full of itself at times, right? Or they live in this bubble and they don't get out and they don't experience the actual real world, the nasty side of the world. And Quinlan Vos, excels in that type of atmosphere. And he's like the Han Solo of the Jedi, effectively, right?
Yeah.
He's kind of loose cannon. And that's what makes him interesting.
Okay, well, I think with that, we'll end it here, at least for Quinlan Vos and the Jedi at this point. And I think coming up, episode 245, we are going to touch on Bad Batch. So for those of you that are, again, I think we mentioned this kind of kicking off this whole little segment and series of shows that we would be covering some of the lost episodes and lost content of the Clone Wars, and this particular one is should be a lot of fun. So if you're not familiar with it, go out, take a look, listen to it, watch them in prep. I think there's 4 episodes, so not too much content there, but we'll come back and hit Bad Batch next week. As far as how to contact us, we'll just put all the links in there. We're kind of over, so we'll have all the links in the show notes. Please feel free to follow us on all our social media. And drop us a line if you've got some comments, feedback, want to chime in on how well we're doing. And then Discord, again, we plug that a lot. There's a link down there for that. Join us in Discord where you can jump in on some of these colorful conversations that we have about Star Wars and things not related to Star Wars. All right, Jonesy, anything else before we close this out?
It's fun. Clone Wars Legacy. We're on our way, folks. Let's keep it rolling.
Sounds good. All right, guys. We will see you guys in a week.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.